Hey, 3DMJers, this is Andrea Valdez, and you're listening to the 3D Muscle Journey podcast. Today, you're going to hear Brad, Jeff, and Alberto discuss the evolution of their coaching practices. But this episode is definitely not just for coaches. It's also for athletes being coached, and honestly, any person who's looking to get better at any craft over time. You're going to hear stories, anecdotes, mistakes, lessons, and strategies about how much each of the coaches has changed as a person and professional in their field. And you'll find loads of nuggets and parallels between how being a better athlete makes them better and smarter in other areas of life as well. In short, this one's going to make you rethink how you've picked your mentors in life or online, and whether or not you're being a good student and getting all that you can from those interactions or content in a way that serves you. As always, if you have any feedback or comments on this episode, let us know at 3dmusclejourney.com or under this video on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/team3dmj. And it is podcast number 224. So let's get into it. Here is How to Avoid Coaching Plateaus with Brad Loomis, Jeff Alberts, and Alberto Nunez.
So, guys, I was doing some cleaning the other day, and I found a folder from like 2000 and want to say in like 4. And in this folder, I found all of the meal plans that I made for one of my clients that I was coaching at the time. Because the way that Brad used to do business is that I would make a meal plan, and then we would basically just proactively every 2 weeks, we would reduce something. And so I would print out a new meal plan, take the one from them, give them the new one. And I say, okay, here's what we're going to run with for the next couple of weeks. And I was like, wow, that was probably at least 4, maybe 5 versions of Brad ago where I did that, you know, and keep in mind that I only had like 3 clients at the time, because that was when Brad was a gym owner. But I was like, that seems like an eternity ago. That seems like when I was like 12. that I was doing that. And it just got me thinking, I'm like, man, we've come a long way. A lot of our coaching philosophies, our stands, our positions, they've been updated. And not only because of evidence, but because of what we've observed in ourselves and each other, in clients and whatnot. So it got me kind of on a bit of a kick where I'm kind of like doing some searching. What do I need to learn? I need to keep Brad updated, you know? So that's kind of where I want to take it today is what are we doing? What are we doing that's different now? What are we doing to keep ourselves updated? You know, what do we kind of cringe at what we used to do, you know? So I think back to that and I cringe. I'm like, wow, I can't believe that anybody hired me as a coach. Jeff, what makes you cringe? When you think back to Jeff version 2 or version 1, is there anything that makes you cringe like that?
As a coach, I recall this is probably like the first year or 2 that we were coaching. And I took this one guy through an entire contest prep. And long story short, like he was very successful. Younger guys, like maybe 20, 21 at the time, came really close to getting his pro card. So we were highly successful as far as getting him into contest shape and placing well and all that. So of course, at the end, I'm like, okay, you know, that's a great job. You know, we were highly successful. And a few days after the prep, he emailed me and says, I absolutely hated everything we did when it came to the training aspect. And then it felt so terrible to me. Like it didn't matter like how successful we were. It was just the fact that here's this guy that prepped for like 6 months or even longer than that, and he didn't enjoy his training at all. Like to me, that was just like a gut punch. And what I learned was that, wow, okay, I need to communicate a lot more with athletes. I need to, you know, when I assign protocols, I think it should be like done together and actually getting buy-in. Like, is this something that you feel like we can do and you might enjoy doing? And so in a sense, I just wasn't a good communicator. that first year that I was coaching. Like, I mean, not to say I wasn't communicating at all, but it could have been a lot better.
Okay.
So I kind of cringe at just how I used to do business back then, as far as like putting people's protocols together without really having like in-depth conversation and trying to figure out how each person really clicks. So that was kind of an eye opener. And I still, like, to this day, like, it still bothers me. And, I've had communication with this person since then, but it's just like, it still bugs me to this day. Here we are, like, 12 years later.
Yeah, I mean, I remember when we first started in 2010, we would just basically write up a program and send it out to people. So here's your program. Start following this on Monday, And I'm like, wow, because now I meet with every single client. I want to meet on Skype, Zoom, Google Meets, whatever. It takes me 90 minutes at a minimum, to make a program for somebody. I'm like, how did we do that back then? Bert, what about you? What makes you cringe about Alberto version 1 or version 2?
Yeah. There's been many software updates since, and when one hasn't come up in a while, like, I start to really suspect what I'm putting out there. I'd say the biggest error, when I really stop and think about it, like, it was just, there was a time when you were really far ahead of everyone else in the fitness industry, when you just paid respect to the way the whole energy balance equation worked. There was a time where, believe it or not, like, unfortunately, I'd say it's not quite where it was before, because I think most everyone has some grasp of like calories and how useful of a metric like that is. But there was a time where like most bodybuilders would probably do better like just following a Weight Watchers program than like hiring like, X coach. Like, that's how bad it was. So we were really ahead of our time simply because we were using calories to guide our decisions. And like, that was like the backbone infrastructure of our nutritional programs. So what this meant was that, weight loss, so long as the athlete was adhering, wasn't so much a mystery. Like, I kind of knew what was going to happen. And I think there's many occasions where in hindsight, I'm like, man, I got this athlete much leaner than they needed to be at this point in time. Like, we probably could have gone off the gas a little bit, had a conversation about that, and they might still be bodybuilding today. Because in hindsight, I'm like, they got shredded, but at what cost? Like, that was too much too early. It's kind of like, like pitch counts with like baseball, right? It's like, they keep track of those things for a reason, because, by the time you get to the more advanced levels, it's like, okay, we want to know what sort of mileage there is there. So I think that's the first one that comes to mind. It was like that meme, Oprah with her cars, right? Like, you get a car. It was like, to me, it was like, you're getting shredded. Everyone's getting shredded today. Like, that was, yeah. And like it still weighs on me because, man, even for me, like the first time I got shredded, like it did some funny things to me mentally. And in many ways, like, I was a great candidate for that at that point. And still, it was really harsh on me. So if I could go back and redo those, I definitely would. So my Gen 1 athletes, I'd say that this is probably 2008 to 2011. Like, a lot of them, I would have, probably, taken a step back and be like, hey, let's look at this longer term plan and what we're doing now can potentially impact that. So that's that one. That one keeps me up still to this day.
What do you think? I'm taking over the Larry King duties here, Brad, for a second.
You got the glasses too, so
yeah, I got glasses. They're a little smaller, but they'll work. So, what do you think influenced that approach? Like, what do you think the reasons behind that was? Like, was it just the fact, like, a lot of ego there? I got to get my athletes shredded so that way you get more clients, or what was the What was the backbone to all that, you think?
Two things. I think first, this is what they wanted. And sometimes what someone wants, like that's not necessarily the best thing for them. So, you know, kind of like what you mentioned, Jeff, it's like, there's a middle ground, right? Because, you know, you can totally just take over the whole project and, you know, they feel like they weren't heard. But sometimes if you let them take over too much, like, it's like you're just here to facilitate a lot of the errors that, you know, in many cases we've all made, and we want better for them. So, so that was one, was just, this is what they wanted. This is what was cool. All right, let's do it. And then, yeah, the other one was definitely, I wanted, you know, the company was still in its infancy at this point. So I wanted people to know that we could get these results. So in my mind, I didn't think I was doing anything wrong, but like in hindsight, like, was it morally the right thing to do? No, I wish I would have been better informed.
So it's probably like just lack of experience at that time as a coach, and kind of diving into like more individual context.
Yeah.
And
you have
just,
one or two like
because
skills, tools, like you tend to overuse them. You think you know everything at that point, right? You're like, okay, like I know how to do this. I know how to do that. I got this. And it's like, no, bro, you really don't. It's very easy when, you know, you're just starting out with anything to not really understand how much there is out there that you don't know.
Yeah, that's the big thing is, I mean, we don't know what we don't know, right?
Scary.
I mean, I remember vividly with female athletes, I would kind of come out the gate kind of hard and aggressive because my mind was, you know what, if I can get their menstrual cycle to go away, they're not going to be as hungry. They're going to be able to adhere better, you know. That was kind of my thinking, you know, and I didn't even realize at the time, or it didn't even really enter into my mind that if you know what, if you can keep a female's menstrual cycle intact, like their whole prep, they'll get leaner. They'll get leaner and more muscular. They'll retain more muscle than that version 2 or version 3 of Brad that was like, this will help our adherence if we can lose this pesky menstrual cycle, you know. But I didn't know at the time. At the time, it was kind of like, okay, the like you said, Alberto, we got to get in a condition. We got to get on stage. We want to place well. And, you know, in my experience, this is what works, you know, and sometimes it would happen sooner. Sometimes it would happen later, but I didn't know any better, you know, and now, of course, again, that's one of those things that makes me cringe and it keeps me up at night sometimes, you know? So yeah, I mean, that's kind of one of the things that keeps me motivated to kind of keep up on my stuff, I guess you might say, you know, try to keep updated with things, you know, like I told you, when I saw those meal plans, I was like, oh, wow, that was a long time ago. I wonder if I'm getting antiquated again. What do I need to do, you know, to keep myself updated, you know? And so then I kind of started, was like, okay, I need to start absorbing some content, doing some reading. You know, usually my go-to is always Eric, you know, and the nice thing about Eric is he's everywhere. You know, he's on this podcast, he's on Iron Culture, he's on our podcast, you know? And so I start kind of doing my homework. But, you know, sometimes I think I should probably do that more often, you know, because it's kind of nice. We've got this nice, like, it's this clientele that is kind of like our way of keeping updated. We're observing our clients and we're observing ourselves all the time. And that's nice. That's one of those things that kind of keeps us, updated, continuing education, kind of on the edge of what are the best tools and the best methods. But I'm always like, well, what else? What else can I do? And that's what was kind of prompted me to start doing a little bit more, updating Brad to the next version and doing that software upgrade. What do you guys do, Jeff? What do you do to make sure that you're keeping up on your stuff and keeping the knives sharp?
I'm not a reader. So one, I don't have a lot of time out I got, you know, athletes to coach. I have, you know, family to take care of. So I don't have like ample time to sit down and dive into a lot of reading.
That's it.
So I definitely rely heavily on Eric, because he seems to be able to communicate what's important very succinctly. So I'll gravitate towards a lot of his, information. I also look at maybe some other podcasts that, like the Iron Culture podcast, of course, is with Eric. But I find like Omar is such a good thinker, and the way he kind of talks perspectives, like I can kind of relate, and he kind of helps me to take concepts and to think about it in different ways. I also look at other sports, as you guys probably heard me in the last year or two. Like I look at other sports because there's so much to take away from their concepts and their principles. I'm like, oh, how can I apply that to our sport? And a lot of times, like other sports are, in a sense, as far as like how they game plan things, like, seasons, like, whether it's their off seasons, their end seasons, how they look at things maybe 2 or 3 years down the line, how they're building their teams. Like I think from that perspective, like I try to think from that supply demand perspective, like what makes sense here. And just ongoing working with like a full roster. And you guys know, it's like when you're actually in the trenches with them and you're putting some things into practice, and if you're communicating really well, like I've learned to communicate a lot better than I used to back in the day, you get to see like firsthand, like what that experience is like. Is it a positive experience? Is it a negative experience? And that can be dependent on, different time too. Like, maybe a year ago, things worked extremely well, or now today it doesn't. Now you have to try to adapt and try something new and see what the best result would be. So it's kind of an ongoing process where if I can take myself back to when we first started, I felt like I was behind the times because I didn't have that science background, because when I met you guys, I was more bro, just more of like anecdotal, experience of what I've done personally, because I wasn't coaching any athletes. So like, I was like, kind of like, okay, if I wasn't like well read, like if I didn't memorize certain things, which I realize now that memory isn't a form of intelligence. It just means you're good at remembering things. So, just kind of contrasting the differences. It's like, back then I would say I was probably more versed on the experience side, even though my experience was limited as a coach, versus now where it's like, I kind of have a balance between both worlds. And what's important is I'm open-minded to understand that I don't know all the answers to everybody's issues up front. And I think as a coach, I think it's super important that you're humble with that, because oftentimes people are coming to you for an answer, but how can you honestly say the exact answer before you actually put anything into practice? Like it's almost impossible. So I know I try to have an open mind, like, okay, in theory, this might work well, but at the same time, it may not. And I have to stay open-minded, stay aware, and listen, assess, make adjustments, and continue on from there.
Yeah, you kind of got me fired up there a little bit, Jeff, because you kind of sound like me because I mean, I love doing this. I love coaching. I love coaching in what we do in strength sports and bodybuilding. And so I'm always like, kind of like you. I'm thinking, okay, how can I apply this, like I model of off-season sports and seasons to bodybuilding, or I'll read something that Bert's put up and I'm like, oh, that's really good. How can I apply that to me? And how can that make me better as a bodybuilder or whatever? And I think it kind of, one of the things that it kind of boils down to is it's kind of like we still have this passion for what it is that we're doing. And so we're always trying to pull whatever it is that we're learning or we're kind of experiencing and make it as part of our coaching guidance, our philosophies, our stands, our helping our clients to get better, and move past the suck of prep, and into that off season. But yeah, you kind of got that little bit of passion kind of just flared up in me a little bit, because I'm always thinking about that. I'm like, oh, that's really good. How can I put that into use that as a coach, or use that with my clients, or, whatever. So, that was really good. That not very often does Brad get sparked like that. How about you, Berto? What do you do to keep sharp and to keep the edges, razor sharp?
I think I discriminate a lot less when it comes to where my source of information is coming from. So, this goes for like any sort of interaction. So, like, it can be with an athlete. Like, I guess it's rooted in a pretty selfish perspective, but I think at the end everyone wins when I take it from this angle, and that's just basically I'm going to be the one that like leaves this interaction when it is a close quarters one, like learning more. So whether it's, I don't know, helping someone at the gym like with their chest press, like it's like, who knows, they might like forget everything I teach them next week and or not have any buy-in, but who cares? Because I'm going to learn as much as I can from you right now. But in a more global sense, where this has changed is I think in the past I was more closed-minded to who I would learn from. And it's like, who cares? Like if you're like from this opposing tribe, or the vibe that you're trying to sell is that we're this or that we're that. Because, I guess everyone has a gimmick, whether they know it or not, like, or a perceived gimmick anyways. So, for example, a few times that I've kind of gone away with this, like just like it's prevented me from learning as much. The more I think about it, the more that just pop up. I think first one was probably, I was very like, there was a point in time where like everything that was kind of born out of like, for example, Dr. Joe was to me like, okay, like this is where we need to focus on, and like, don't mind these other folks too much. And right around this time, like Lyle McDonald was kind of like starting to become a little bit more mainstream, but a lot of his audience happened to be the overly analytical people who were, he wrote a book on like how to crash diet, for example, because people were going to do that shit anyway. So it's like, all right, this is how you crash diet in the most sensible way, but please don't do it. So I wouldn't look that way, because I'm like, no, this is for the crazies. Like this doesn't apply to what I'm trying to do here. And then, lo and behold, like eventually I got in there and I'm like, wow, a lot of this stuff makes a lot of sense. Same with probably Cliff Wilson at some point. I was just like, all right, like this is not how I would do this, and that. But like when it comes to working with like the highest level, like I can't think of any natural bodybuilding coach. I'd say any coach out there who, like, let's just talk resumes. Let's just talk bottom line. Like, in part, that is probably what like pulled me away. It's like, okay, this is kind of like Darwinism when it comes to athletes. Of course, like only like the most blessed and, most stubborn athletes are going to endure. But after getting to like meet Cliff a few times, getting to interact, getting to see him present, I'm like, bro, like you are so dynamic in the way you think. Like you are, it's good that you are part of my network now. And if I have any sort of question, it's like it's nice to have you there and I can learn a lot from you. So that's one. And then shoot, even John Meadows, like there was a time when I'm just like, this is for like the bros. Like that's all it was. Like a system called like Mountain Dog. It's like someone's just really trying to, hide behind something, right? Not him, but the purveyors of it. It's like the people who are going to follow those routines. I'm just like, it appeals to this kind of person, right? So like on my own mind, I kind of like framed all these people, like whether any of these like three educators is some sort of caricature, like in my mind, like this is what they are. And then I get in there and I'm like, oh wow! Like first time I saw John present, it was we got to present at the same event somewhere like in the middle of the Midwest in like some supplement warehouse. But I was like blown away. I was like, wow! Like this dude is it. Like he's worth the price of admission. So yeah, I've had enough of those where I'm just like, okay, I don't care who it is. I don't care if it's some kid at the gym who's I'm trying to teach how to deadlift. or some guy that kind of, is weird crew over there, there might be something there that I can learn from them. So I discriminate far less, and I feel like I can learn something from everyone. I do every day, like from my athletes. Like that's when I get in there and I do my work. That is when I especially when I'm having a hard day, I'm like, shit. Like this is where the majority of what I know comes from. Like this is me sharpening up my skill set every day. So yeah, I think that is definitely made me a better learner, just being less picky about where it comes from. And it's something that I hope to keep that way, because it's very easy to just kind of, stay in like your own little cliques and only listen to like the stuff that your friends like provide. But yeah, I'm trying to, like, no matter who it is, like you can learn something from them, and I firmly believe that.
Yeah, that's really good because, and that's something I need to be better at, because we all have our biases, and whether it's biases in our sport, biases, on how we lean politically, it kind of influences who we'll listen to, and who we won't. And that's one thing that I really like when we're all together. I really like just sometimes observing both you, Berto, and Jeff too, because like I'll watch you guys a lot of times as you're interacting with people, and you're just sitting there looking at them and listening. You know what I mean? You can just kind of see that you're just listening, and it's kind of like I can almost kind of see the gears turning as your guys are filtering this stuff out, and taking in what you want, and that's something I need to be better at, because if it's kind of one of those things where if you just kind of getting your information from just the sources that you like and the biases that you have, you're not really making very good, you're not being a very good purveyor of information, I guess you might say. You're kind of being programmed. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But yeah, that's really good. That's really good, information that I'll kind of run with, more so than anything. So yeah, thank you for sharing that, Berto. What's something that you guys, what's the thing that you guys have learned that you're kind of running with right now? Like something that you're kind of doing with a lot of your clients right now. Like right now, one of the things that I've kind of started doing as of the last 6 months, and I'm kind of starting to develop a little bit better system of it, is watching my bodybuilders' technique when it comes to lifting. And I've kind of come to the realization that kind of how you lift sometimes is going to ultimately have, accumulation, of course, over time, but it's going to affect your outcome, more so than anything. I kind of come around to where it's kind of like, well, it's not just lifting, it's kind of how you lift, what your tempo is. And Berto, this is kind of something that I've kind of observed, as of late with you. It's kind of expanded upon my observance of Jeff's instinctive lifting, if I can kind of refer to that blog that I wrote back in the day. But I'm kind of starting to get a good system of collecting, how people are lifting, and giving them constructive feedback, and kind of knowing a little bit better. Not that I'm there yet, but learning kind of what the things are that I need to tweak, and that's not something that I used to do very often. I wouldn't really look at bodybuilders lifting. It was just kind of for those power lifters. I want to see how your 3 competition lifts look, and how can we make them better, and show me what your RPE 8.5, 9 looks like, and let's evaluate that together. But now I'm kind of starting to collect more data from my bodybuilders as well.
Hey everyone, this is Andrea Valdez popping in real quick to tell you about our latest course in the 3DMJ Vault called Calculating Your Macros. We'll go over the purpose and research of each individual macronutrient, why we calculate and prescribe their values the way we do, and go over loads of simple equations to get you where you need to go. By the end of this course, you'll know exactly how to set your protein, carbohydrate, and fat intake for both cutting and gaining phases, using both male and female avatars, using both pounds and kilograms for every calculation. But the first thing you'll need to know in order to set macros is that you need to already know your maintenance calories, which is why, as you might already know, last year-ish, mid last year, we already have a calculating your calories course in there that you can watch before you take this new calculating your macros course. All of our courses kind of build upon each other like this in the 3DMJ Vault, which is our online learning platform of organized education for serious lifters. There are currently 18 courses in the Vault, and you can become a VIP member to get access to every single one of those for just $16.99 per month or $79.99 per year. VIP members will get these 2 courses that I've already mentioned, the lifting library, our contest prep Q&A collection, the sustainable fat loss course, the lagging body parts course, the injury reduction and management Q&A collection, and many more. Go to 3dmjvault.com and sign yourself up today. That's 3dmjvault.com to get all access. Thanks so much for listening and enjoy the rest of the show.
Jeff, what's something that you've come up with here recently that's kind of been very useful for you as a coach in making your clients better?
I think I need a few more seconds to think about that, but I'm going to touch on the form assessments. So something that I've, like, you guys know me, like personally, like my form looks like I'm a robot and it's very pristine. Everything is standard. Like rep 1 looks like rep 10, just slower. So, I'm big on like standardizing my form, but I think my perspective on it has changed in a sense. Like sometimes, like when you watch somebody do a form, it might look a little ugly. You might like, man, that looks a little ugly. But what I realize is that something that might look ugly might actually feel very sweet and natural. So now what I've been doing a lot of is like, okay, send me form videos. I want to see what it looks like. I want to see what the effort level looks like, how close to failure you are, etc. But I also want them in a sense to tell me how it's feeling. Like what are they thinking? Why are they doing it the way they're doing? What's the goal? Like how they're moving? What's the goal of it? Just kind of getting a little bit more of their feedback on it, because that can help me to help them better. So, maybe, hey, if everything just feels so comfortable and everything is, perfect for them, even though it doesn't look in my eyes to be good. But hey, if it's standardized, like if they're doing it the same way every single time and there's no aches, no pains, it's safe, then in a sense, that's the baseline they work from. And the goal with most people when they're bodybuilding is to try to improve performance, whether it's increasing the load, increasing the reps, rep speed, what have you. Like they're always trying to elevate from that baseline. So you could kind of say that I've like opened up my mind a bit, and I'm not like just set in one certain way of like form has to be like exactly like this for everybody. So that,
like how Jeff does it. Yeah.
So I mean, the goal is just to try to get them standardized, whatever. So I think too, it's like my training, I call it a style, like in a sense, the way I lift, it's a style, right? Like everything's very controlled. There's not a lot of momentum. There's not a lot of leveraging. That is my style. And it's easy to get defensive of that. Someone attacks my style and says I'm not doing it right or whatever. It's like anybody, like my bald head saying, hey, Jeff, man, you got a bald head. It's like, I can get defensive about it, or I can be like, yeah, you're right, I'm bald. But this is how I like to roll with my hairstyle. So it's the same thing with lifting. Like if it's standardized, whether it's a little bit of momentum or it's just super perfect, like the result, I mean, it's like probably splitting fine hairs. Like 10 years from now, you're probably not gonna be able to tell the difference in someone's physique. Because you can look at any bodybuilder, right? Like Ronnie Coleman. I mean, he's loose, right? Look how loose he was. But yet he's Mr. Olympia 8 times. You look at Dorian Yates, he's a little bit more controlled. Mr. Olympia, 6 times? And I mean, the list goes on. You can look at any bodybuilders across the board, and there's a lot of different styles. You can go back to the early 1900s and look at those guys lift with these funky looking barbells, but yeah, they're still jacked.
Yeah, I remember Skip LaCour. Remember how loose he was with a lot of his stuff? And he's still kind of that way, and to be honest with you, because he did it, that was the way I was going to do it. And that was the only way to do it. Yeah. That was, if you wanted to get jacked and look like Skip LaCour, you had to do it that way. You know, And now I've kind of come a little bit, more 180 on that. It's like, okay, that's his style. That's how he lifts, and it worked real well for him. And it really wasn't even that ugly. It was just kind of loose, but it was still, you could just kind of tell it was a combination of a little bit of momentum and, the muscle, taking over at the right times and things like that. But that's good stuff, Jeff, because I mean, that's kind of something that I'll probably put into my system.
It's an ego as an athlete. It's like, oh, you're protecting that style, or as a coach, like, hey, I'm trying to make sure these people are like perfect with form. Like that to me, it's like if you're just set in one specific way and you're not catering to different individuals, then it's like, are you really doing them a service, or are you just kind of protecting your own ego?
Yeah. Well, don't think that I'm letting you off of what the big thing is that Jeff's doing as a coach.
Good.
So
I'm going to turn into Larry King. So,
so
what about you, Alberto?
We'll come back to you. Yeah, we'll come back to you. We'll find out what Bert's big thing is that he's working toward in his evolution.
Well, and to help you out with this, Jeff, I think you just kind of said it anyways, but like I think it helps if you frame it from the perspective of something I wouldn't believe I'd be doing, just 5 years ago, right? And I think that kind of fits that category, right?
Right.
Speaking of freaking learners, like as you guys mentioned, Skip, like, and how I am much more like, all right, let me take a back seat and see what I can learn here, as opposed to like, let me try to flex.
This.
Yep.
That man used me in hindsight. Holy crap! Because like we started. He kind of like befriended me like over a decade ago. To me, like, I was kind of coming into my own. He was kind of putting the bodybuilding thing away at this point, but like his legend still kind of echoed, right? So anyhow, he would hit me up with questions, and I'm like, I can't believe I have Skip LaCour here. And he's hitting me up with questions. And every interaction we ever had, like I ran into him at the San Jose Fit Expo, like I think it was like 2017. Like that's all it turned into, man. It's like all he was just asking away. And I'm like, why are we doing this? It's like, here you are, you're very accomplished, wise guy.
Machine. Yeah.
Right. And just like, yeah, I felt like I was on the stand basically. And so anyhow, I want to be more like Skip. But yeah, if I could, what would be different compared to what would surprise me? So, I've really been so sold on the notion that, I think I've said this before, that it's again, it's like 80-20 rule, which is like cliche and cheesy in its own way. But, with the whole notion that like, 80% of your results is via 20% of your efforts, and you might think like, well, I'm way beyond that. But like, I mean, think about it. Like, it's always there. Like there was things I was doing when I first started training that I'm like, wow, I was eating 8 meals a day or something ridiculous because I felt like I had to, I was, taking this and that, doing this and that because I felt like I had to. And I was afraid to not do those things because up until this point, like, it seems like they're working.
It worked.
So, I've been big into simplifying, like, what is like the root, like, I guess the root compound here that is actually like moving things in the right direction. And not just when it comes to training, but when it comes to like many other things. So yeah, I get a little bit in there when it comes to some of my people's like lives, for example. It's like, okay, let's examine work. Let's examine what you do in your free time, all these things. And I guess really help them like trim the fat across the board. And what ends up happening is you see people going further than they would have with like systems that required just harder to keep up with. And not only are they able to go further, but like if we ever need to add something, like there's space for that. So, I mean, I look at like my last contest prep and like you couldn't have sold me on that, like, during my first prep, which was a disaster, like everything from, the amount of training I was doing to sometimes it was 2 meals and a snack. Sometimes it was 4 meals. Some days like I went out to eat twice because that's what I had to do. But it was just these solid, like, I guess the big rocks were holding everything together. And as long as I had that foundation set, like I was good. So, because generally speaking, it's like, I know what's going to get me there. Time and a caloric deficit and a few other variables sprinkled in there. Right. So a lot of like protein intake was probably averaged around 140, 150 grams, like the whole way. And this was the best muscle retention I've ever had. So I try to do that with people now, where it's just like, all right, like just across the board, like, let's see how much we can simplify this, see if we're still heading in the right direction. And it's like almost the exact opposite from the errors that I did the first time. It's like, I want to make you a lifer, because at the end, I get time is the great equalizer. Like what really matters is like, how can I keep you in the game for 10, 15, 20 years? Like that is where the real good stuff happens outside of like just your bodybuilding goals, like just from like a health perspective. So that's probably been the big thing. It's like, okay, like let's really ask why we're doing this and that, and really just trying to make whatever like extracts we use is pure as possible, and really try to isolate the compounds that are really causing the net effect here.
Yeah, that's a good point. Like it's kind of like we're trying, and I didn't ever even think about it this way, but it's kind of like we're trying to get rid of the stuff that we think matters, but really doesn't, and just kind of get down to the core things that like do matter. Like for example, I've gotten rid of a lot of, okay, I don't need to really pay attention too much to supplements and pre-workout and those are the things I'm like filtering out. I'm like, it's just confusing the issue, like you said, the 8 meals a day shoot. At one point, I think I was up to like 12 or something like that.
Yeah.
But then kind of coming back around and saying, okay, well, you know what? How's your sleep? And this is something that, Berto, I'm going to kind of give you props for. Eliminating the electronic devices, anywhere from 2 hours to half an hour before you go to bed. So that sleep component has kind of one of the things that I've kind of start paying a little bit more attention to that kind of matters, that, it's so simple, just get off your phone for the last 30 minutes before you go to bed. And it's revealed itself, not only in our little app, that kind of gives me the sleep score and shows me the duration of my deep sleep and my REM sleep. But after that accumulates, after about 4 or 5 days, I can feel it like in my training performance in the gym. I can kind of feel it when I got to go out there and scrape ice off the freaking driveway so I don't fall and bust my hip, just the energy throughout the day, it's kind of like, okay, let's not focus on that stuff. Brad, you don't even really use that stuff that you're observing. Let's kind of look at the important things. And like you said, let's look at the 20% that is important, that affects like the big portion, of our outcome. That's, that's people, really good.
Like it's very easy to see that going on, like with like very primitive versions of yourself as a bodybuilder. Like like we know so much more collectively. But like you didn't think that was going on back then. Like you were literally, like, the equivalent I use is like, I took this from Ian McCarthy. He said this once about nutrition. It's like the equivalent of like, spinning in a circle before you go through a door. Like if you do that your whole life, like that's just what you're going to, this is how you go through doors. There's no other way of going through a door. So like you don't realize just how much things might not be contributing nearly as much as you imagine at any stage. Not just like when you're a noob. Like the last 5 years, there's been so many things that I've eliminated, and I've been able to identify what the things are that are contributing the most. So I can work on those even more. And I still very suspect of like the current version of myself and like what I do with my athletes.
You used a term like that one time too, Bert. You was sacrifice a goat for the sun to come up.
Yeah.
Sacrifice an animal for the sun. Yeah. Always worked. Sun
Yeah.
comes up every
Sun
time we
came up, yeah.
sacrifice that goat, All right, Jeffrey, it's time for you to drop some Godfather knowledge and truth bombs on us.
I was hoping that your 51-year-old brain would forget. I was sitting there thinking while you guys were talking. I was listening to you guys because I can do two things at once. But
You're a better man than me.
I think, something I've always done, but I think I just put a lot of emphasis into it, especially now that I'm prepping a lot of athletes this season, is I'm encouraging people to lean on my experience because, when we first started coaching, like I told you guys earlier, I felt like I was behind the times when it came to the research and the science stuff. But, as I've coached now, our 12th year or 13th year, something like that, working with so many different people and just, having my own personal experiences as an athlete, like I have a lot of data in my brain, like a lot of experiences there. So I've gone through personally, like all the ups and downs and in-betweens that this sport has to offer. And there's one thing that I realized, like by the seminars that we've done, us presenting, to groups, is that there's some engagement there. But when we do our, Q&As at the end of a seminar, that's where people are like way more engaged because they're actually getting to listen to our own experiences. And that has a lot of weight, So, if someone's doing great, of course, you want to hear about it and you want to share your own experiences, about the positives. But it's during those low points where people struggle a little bit and, whether they think there's something physically wrong, maybe mentally, emotionally, like just because someone else with experience has gone through that and you have a lot to offer someone who really hasn't experienced that. So I've been really encouraging people to just lean on my experience because as a coach, that's where I have a lot of advantage is, 30 plus years of bodybuilding experience. So I've been able to, in my eyes anyways, help people a lot more when they open up and they actually like just let themselves to be open in a sense. Like tell me exactly what's going on and be inquisitive and ask questions. That's where I'm able to kind of draw from that experience and share it with people. Because let's face it, like if I don't have 30 years experience and all I know is like, okay, I read this research paper that says this is how I'm supposed to prep athletes, and to make sure they're losing 0.5 to 1% of their body. Like everything is just number based, let's say. Like that's only going to go so far. So I think as a coach, what I've learned too, like every single year that I do this, it just expands that experience level and my perspectives change so much. Not only do they change, but they actually I get to add another layer or two to that. And I can see things from different perspectives now. Like I could take the same individual, but they could be totally like different scenarios. And I'll probably have like 2 or 3 different ways to approach that individual. And I probably couldn't have done that like 10 years ago. So I think it's just super important that whether you're a coach or athlete, like don't be scared to actually just get in there and get your hands dirty and just experience things, whether it's going to be successful or not. Like if you're willing to just keep your mind open and learn, you'll be able to draw so much from that. So that's what I'm encouraging, a lot of my check-ins. Like right now, because it's early in the season, we're in the first few check-ins, just starting the preps out. So I'm kind of getting a feel as far as like how they're checking in, how they're communicating. I might have one athlete, okay, they're not really saying too much, then opening it up. So I'm encouraging them, hey, next check-in, I want to hear about your energy levels. I want to hear about this, I want to hear about that. Like open up a little bit more. So that way I can get a sense as to, the type of person they are and, what might be positives, what might be negatives. And then that way I come up with a better game plan moving ahead is how I address this person, how to guide them, utilizing the experience and all the research that we have, to our advantage.
Yeah, because those experiences, a lot of times, you don't even know how valuable they are until somebody asks you the right question. Like I recently had a question. Hey, what can I do to make myself a little fuller besides vegetables? That's just vegetables, salsa. What's something that's kind of low calorie that I can kind of utilize to make myself feel fuller. Pumpkin. And then
That was an inside joke, Brad.
Well, I know, but that's one that works, believe it or not. But what really helped a client one time was I just said, you know what, laughing cow cheese. I really like laughing cow cheese. I remember when Berto, he used to take didn't you like take crackers and like just kind of like scrape off little pieces of laughing cow cheese? Wasn't it you that did that? Yeah.
Yeah, but I only do the stinky fancy cheese because we're extra like that. But yeah.
But just that one thing, they took laughing cow cheese and started mixing it in tuna fish. They started mixing it with egg whites and make Angus salad. They started mixing it with all kinds of stuff, and pretty soon they're starting to make like cheese sauce. That one thing about laughing cow cheese, and they just ran with it. And I was like, that was an experience that I had that I didn't even know would be useful, And that's the thing is we got to encourage our athletes to, like you said, Jeff, rely on our experiences, rely on the stuff that we've done before that we didn't even think about, at the time. And how valuable that might be for somebody that wasn't even around back then, much less doing, bodybuilding things and looking for these different strategies, right? One of the things that you said though, Jeff, how many times have we like done stuff that worked, gone away from it for whatever reason, and then kind of came back to it and it's like, oh, duh. That worked. Why did I get away from that? I can't really think of anything not food related right now. But yeah, that's kind of something that it's kind of like stretching. It's like you're stretching when something's bothering you and you feel like you have to. And then once it goes away, you quit stretching. And it's like, why did I get away from stretching? It was working, I'll have to think about that. But do you guys have anything that you've like gone away from? And it was like, why did I get away from that? That was working.
Things that you were doing right, that ideas that, okay, you kind of abolished for a number of different reasons.
For whatever reason. Yeah.
Shoot.
I think sometimes they only have so much bandwidth. So because obviously we have evolved as coaches, so you're always kind of like moving on to something else.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes it's like you only have so much bandwidth, so you kind of have to let something else go in order to make space. So I know sometimes that happens with me, not just with like bodybuilding stuff, but just with life stuff. Like, washing your car. I wash my car every week. Well, all of a sudden something pops up. I can't wash my car every week now. And you let it go and like, oh shit, my car's dirty. I got to get back to doing that. It's kind of same principles.
Because I used to be really good. Being a gym owner, it was a small gym. I was kind of limited at what it was that I could do for this muscle or this exercise or that exercise, But the other day, I was just thinking to myself, I was just farting around in my gym because I was pretty much done.
That's what 51-year-olds do. We literally fart around. Like I actually fart. But anyways.
Yeah, there's a walking fart joke right there, but I'm just going to leave that right there. But anyway, so I'm just kind of farting around in the gym, and I was like, I came up with like a pin supported overhead press with a barbell. And I was like, this is the second thing that I've come up with now with the help of, some of my clients. I used to be really good at that. Like just creatively using gym equipment to come up with really good ways to do certain exercises and certain muscles. And I kind of got away from it, and it's like, why did you get away from that? You're probably right, Jeff. Probably some of it's bandwidth, but I kind of wonder sometimes if it's like, we think to ourselves where there's that, oh, this is that new shiny toy. This is that thing that is going to propel us, to the next level. And so we kind of start focusing on that, or maybe we kind of get in ruts. I don't know. It's kind of one of those things where it's like, why do we get away from the stuff that works?
See, for me, it's more the other way. Like, I think that happens, but usually it's just a rusty old tool that I'm like, oh, that's right, I didn't use this in a minute because I haven't had to for whatever reason, right? It's like, but here it is, bottom of the toolbox. But I think more often than not, it's like, what's been a huge error of mine is I've fallen victim to the sunk cost fallacy, where there's an idea or a way of doing things that it might have worked really well at some point for a number of different reasons, but now maybe we found something better, or maybe this specific tool isn't the tool for these other jobs. And in the past, I've had a hard time like letting go of that. I think one that I was almost going to die on a hill on was going to be the front loading for bodybuilding shows. I think front loading
Peak week.
For peak weeks, it works well. I think it's still the safest bet, but I think your athlete has to know how to relay information correctly for that to work. And they need a certain level of experience. So sometimes just a quick backload works better because, you don't have an athlete stressed out like for 7 days about this is peak week and nothing can go wrong. So if you kind of condense that to like, oh, guess what? Peak week is really like 3 days. That might work better. Like, right? You might not have been able to, you can't fill out a person like perfectly when it comes to that, because it's all kind of being done last minute. Like you can't overspill and then like walk it back. But again, like there's a certain level of teamwork and competency on both ends. And it just takes a while for an athlete to be able to decipher what's going on, especially under those circumstances. So walking away from the front load, which to me just makes the most sense, was really hard. But it's something that maybe I'd say I use 25% of the time. And most of the time, like you'll see that on way more experienced athletes as opposed to, people who maybe only have 2-3 preps under their belt. So yeah, that's letting go of things, I think is hard, especially when they've been so good. But again, they're just tools, they're just things. Like, who cares? You gotta update those things. Otherwise, yeah, you fall out of fashion, and that's how people become dinosaurs in the fitness industry.
Yeah, because it's funny that you mentioned that, because I started the podcast talking about my meal plans that I would make for people, right?
Oh yeah.
And I mean,
full circle.
It worked. It worked. More than one competitor won their class, on the bodybuilding stage, doing a meal plan, and just giving them the new meal plan. Okay, here's the new meal plan. We're going to reduce this. We're going to reduce it. But that's not to say that I've just like totally kicked that out the door and said, I'm never using that again. There are occasions where I come back to a meal plan. It's like, I don't know, I'm not quite sure you are calculating your macros correctly. I'm not quite sure that you're doing things. I'm not sure that these numbers that you're reporting on the spreadsheet are what you're actually eating. And so basically I have to make a meal plan for them, and they're super time consuming. And I really don't like doing them because you need a ton of context. What do you like? What do you don't like? What are you allergic to? What do you have, certain sensitivities to, and it's really hard to make a meal plan, but it's not like I don't ever use it. It's kind of like you in the front loading, I will sometimes front load, just because I'm not sure how this person might look. Let's give them their carbs and we got time to clean it up, But again, a meal plan, I will use it. It's a tool that I'll use 1% of the time, maybe 0.5% of the time. So yeah, I mean, it's not to say that those things I don't ever use, you know? Jeff, do you ever kind of use a tool that you need to dust off that you haven't used in a really long time?
Well, I mean, I think if we look back when we first started, I think what we're talking about is like we had a hammer and a screwdriver.
Mm-hmm. Or a hammer and a skill saw. That's it.
Right? Your meal plan was a hammer. Like you're smashing people up with that thing, right? But now it's like your meal plan is like part of your Swiss Army knife. So that's basically the best analogy I can think of. So I mean, yeah, I mean, I think all three of us can probably have a laundry list of things that we used as hammers back then. But through like ongoing experiences, we've kind of broadened, our ability to use that Swiss Army knife, and not just having different tools, but understanding when to use them, under a certain context. Like how do we use this specific tool? And I think like, I'm trying to think like if I was an athlete and I was trying to select who my coach would be, like, hate to say it, but I would be probably going with someone who has probably, traveled quite a few roads, because I want them to be able to, like, if I'm encountering an issue or problem, I want them to be able to have the ability to solve problems, and not just with a hammer, but with the Swiss Army knife. So I would want someone who's like well-versed, of course, with the latest up-to-date information, but also like if I'm contest prepping, like I want someone who's kind of been there and done it as well. So, I can have someone who's relatable to me. But also too, I will say that I don't think there's anything wrong with getting a coach maybe with less experience, but I would have to be open-minded, like I'm giving this person an opportunity to improve their coaching skills, because sometimes I think too, it's like a coach has to learn too, and they're not going to always know everything up front. So you have to be like a doctor, you go to a doctor appointment, they don't know your problems right away. You got to have to work with the doctor. He's going to have to, assess you and see and come up with diagnosis. I think sometimes, like, as an athlete, you have to be open-minded to the coach and understand that they're human too. And they might do some very good work, but there might be, some work that maybe they're not as good at, but maybe through teamwork, you help them to get better. So I think it could go both ways.
Yeah, because I know I've had a few athletes that made me a better coach, and sometimes it was kind of like what Berto said. It's kind of hard. It's like they're kind of making me do stuff that I don't really necessarily want to do, but it's kind of one of those things where you're never good at the bike the first time that you ride it. The first time that you do something, you kind of suck at it, but you get better at it as you utilize it, kind of more and more and more and more. And then a lot of times by the time that tenure was done with that athlete, either they completed their competition, or they decided to go on their own, like they want to end their coaching and kind of take the reins for themselves. It kind of made me a better coach doing those things that I didn't, necessarily, want to do. But at the same time, sometimes you got to do the things that you don't want to do to make yourself better.
I didn't have coaches, early, because there wasn't a thing back then, but I had a lot, quite a few training partners and that. And there's some things that, we did good. And then I kind of look back, oh man, we're doing some crazy dumb stuff. But even through that dumb stuff, it's like, I learned something from it, whether it's like, okay, maybe we weren't, maybe we were training way too hard, but it taught me how to grind, it taught me about work ethic, it taught me about commitment. So I've learned a lot from a lot of different people. And what I don't do, in a sense, now is kind of look back on that and just like crush somebody, like, oh man, they're dumb, or they weren't doing this or that. It's like, no, at the time, like we were doing the best that we could with what we knew at the time, and trying to find positives in it.
Yeah, I remember the max OT cardio days, is 16 minutes, as hard as you could go, just crush yourself, And yeah, bodybuilding wise, it probably wasn't the smartest thing to do, but at the same time, I got in great shape. The resting heart rate was like 39, you know? I was at work walking around and it was like 50, you know? It taught me what it feels like and what it kind of looks like to really crush yourself. And I get to use that in other avenues, you know, I can tell Xander, you know what, you got to get in condition, you know, for football, you know, it's coming up here pretty soon, you know? And so we've got to do those kind of things that kind of crush you, you know, in order to get in that kind of cardiovascular shape, you know? So even though it was not, you know, I was using a hammer for my cardio when I probably should have been using a little rubber mallet, you know, or actually screwing the screw in with a screwdriver instead of trying to hit it with a hammer, you know. I learned from it. So, Berto, you look like you're ready to just add something there.
No, not really.
No?
It's just it's interesting because Jeff kind of compared it to when we started training, and I think you asked mostly anyone about things that would change, you know, during the starting years of their training, and we have a wide list of them, and no different when it comes to coaching. Like, realistically, I'm going to be coaching, I think, far longer than I'm going to be like an athlete at the top of his game. So I kind of take it the same way, where it's like, okay, there's always something to improve upon, and it's exciting because, again, I'm gonna be doing that much longer. So there's a lot to learn, and hopefully, I know every year purposely I try to examine it and like reflect on like the things I learned this year, like what is different. But yeah, hopefully every 5 years from this point onwards, like I can look back and like it looks like, yeah, it looked like the Flintstones to myself, basically. That's kind of the goal.
Yeah, because there's one thing I've learned is that I am a lot more like Pete Carroll. I can see myself 70 years old, you know, coaching in the game. You know what I mean? Then I can kind of see myself being, gosh, I can't think of the guy's name, but the content producers, you know what I mean? The folks that make the fancy TikToks and the fancy content, you know, that really kind of sells the six pack shortcuts or the 7-minute abs or whatever, you know. I can see myself being Pete Carroll than some of those ones, you know. So we've all evolved. We're no longer the Neanderthals that we once were. We're probably just like still a little bit smarter Neanderthal. We've kind of learned how to use fire, and we're going to continue to get better, right? You guys got anything else that you want to add?
Other than this, I remember Berto sending me a video of Marshawn Lynch, right? And
I remember
Pete Carroll
this too.
went over to Marshawn Lynch, and he tried to coach Marshawn Lynch. He's like, hey, I need you to, you know, do this right here, go through this hole here. And Marshawn Lynch just said, I just read it.
I just read it, coach. I remember that too.
And so Pete Carroll tried to say it again, and then he goes like, I just read it. And then he goes, okay, you just read it. So short interaction, but what it taught me was that coach was basically open-minded enough to know, like, okay, I have a veteran player here. I need to trust his instincts and let him play. So that right there, even though it was such a short coaching exchange, I think it said a lot.
And look at those Seahawks that during that time, they were successful.
Same thing as coaches. We're just going to read it, and whatever's there, we going to do what we think is best, right? And just not be afraid to throw away tools that no longer serve us, and be okay with using new methods or very unorthodox methods. Because you know, at the end, it's about the athlete, it's about the clients.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. All right, that was a good note to end on. I like it, Jeff. I like it. So, all right, guys, thank you very much for joining me today. And until the next time we meet, can't wait.